It was exactly 5 past 5 in the afternoon on a Tuesday as I stood in my kitchen overlooking ours and our neighbour's garden. I asked myself, after a month or if not longer off of writing notes on black women to study for my French listening, reading, writing and speaking exams, how the hell do I jump right back into writing my beloved notes on or for black women? During my absence, my ideas continued to flow and were gathered largely on post-it notes. If you're reading this article in the version that's uploaded onto my website, you will see a picture of all my post-it notes there. If you're on YouTube, just imagine a desk filled with post-it notes. As I headed to my office and glanced at them, somehow I didn't feel like sorting through them. It's a hard task trying to decide which topic is priority, when to me, they all are. I did the best thing I could. I grabbed my Black History deck of cards, one focused on women's history and the other on Afro-Caribbean or Afro-Latino history. And that's my background, even though I was born in London. Then I shuffled the deck and simply said to the universe, send me a topic to research and write about. Out popped one card from each deck. Both of them were focused on women. It was a sign. It was time to get back to work and continue creating notes on black women. To start, I'd like to focus on the idea of freedom. When we talk about it or think about it, historical freedom fighters, we often recall the names of men first or only. History actually holds space for women warriors too, although it's not always well documented or called upon, and that's where I come in. And this week's Black Woman included in the encyclopedia of Black women I'm creating. There are some bold, brilliant women who sometimes have been or currently are more involved in the advancement of black people's freedoms and rights than black men have been historically or even presently. One of them is Deolinda Rodrigues de Almeida, and I hope I've pronounced her name correctly, as Portuguese is not a language that I speak. She was an Angolan freedom fighter whose courage lit the path for an African nation's independence. There's a lot that can be said about her role in the fight for liberation. Not only that, after researching a bit about her, I realised she's someone who could also be added into Club 27, if you've ever heard of this. I'll give you a bit more about that in a moment. So who was she? Deolinda was born in 1939 in Angola, Southern Africa. Her country was under brutal Portuguese colonial rule at the time. She grew up in a religious family and was extremely intellectually bright. She studied in Angola and abroad, eventually going to Brazil and the United States. It was her time in the United States, which I would say opened her eyes a lot. She arrived in the USA circa 1960 via a scholarship. She studied at Spelman College, a black women's college historically in Atlanta, Georgia, and also Drew University, which is a Methodist affiliated university in New Jersey. The United States she knew and experienced was very different from the United States we know today. But with that said, with all that's going on currently at the time of me writing this in this part of the world, when it comes to things like DEI, it could very easily be argued that in 2025, it's business as it was in Deolinda's time when she arrived, for black and brown people at least from that perspective. Of course, in the USA, she saw racism, segregation, both up close and personal. As someone researching her history to understand her as a black woman and her contribution as a black woman to our history, it appears that her eyes were open to the fight for liberation, not just in the USA, but globally. She didn't remain in the USA, she went back home to Angola, but it wasn't because she was pushed out, and I put that in quotations, as some other historical black figures have indicated, such as James Baldwin, who fled to Paris to escape the racism in his native country, the USA. In Deolinda's case, it was that her people, women, and her country all needed her. She was more than just a fighter. Deolinda wasn't just a revolutionary with a gun. She was a writer, a thinker, and a woman of faith. She used her words just as powerfully as her actions. Interestingly, she wrote letters and she kept journals where she poured out her thoughts about war, womanhood, sacrifice, and hope. Sadly, especially for me, as someone who loves to read journals and essays of other people, not much of her work has been translated from her native language of Portuguese to English. Only a minor amount has been. She once wrote, "The Angolan woman is not just a woman. She is a worker, a mother, a soldier, and a revolutionary." Sound familiar? Of course it does. Black women all over the world have been holding up families, movements, and future generations since the dawn of day. Deolinda appeared to understand that very deeply for a woman of the time. Here's an excerpt from her actual diary. Now, this was originally written in Portuguese in around the 1960s. They say a woman should not lead, that she should obey. But who do they think carried the water to the fighters in the bush? Who nursed the wounded with no medicine? Who buried the dead with her own hands? I do not carry a rifle for glory. I carry it so my children's children will not be born slaves. If that makes me less of a woman, then I want no part of their definition. And that is by Deolinda. It was published around 2003 in her diary. The English translation of the title is Diary of an Exile Without Return. That was really powerful. How beautiful was that? I haven't actually gotten around to reading this myself, but I am on the hunt for it because I believe that this has been fully translated and this is one text that I would love to read. The thing is though, with Deolinda, her courage did actually cost her. And this is key because in the 1960s, Deolinda became part of the MPLA, which is short for People's Movement for the Liberation of Angola. This organisation was focused on the fight for liberation from the European colonisers in Portugal. Her role was, of course, fighting to free her country. She helped organise women, trained as a fighter, and she ended up becoming a very well-respected leader. Now imagine this line of work in detail and consider the fate of many other freedom fighters that we know historically and how it commonly ends for them. The fight for freedom, generally speaking, and certainly the fight to liberate women from men's oppression, but more precisely, if I consider my own aim as to why I write on certain topics, to liberate Black women from our nuanced oppression and one-sided loyalty to Black men, or even if we consider any other kind of resistance to the status quo of one demographic's oppression. The fighters, in quotation, whoever they are, whoever they may be, they are going to gain some enemies and it could become quite dangerous work. In 1967, this was the case. Sadly, Deolinda was captured by the colonisers, so the Portuguese forces. She was badly tortured and eventually killed, and she was just 27 years old. So Club 27, as I mentioned earlier, so if I said the names Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse, Janis Joplin, or even Jimi Hendrix, just to name a few, would these names raise an eyebrow of suspicion? Would the penny drop for you about what they all had in common? Obviously, it's their age of death. It was 27. They were all iconic figures in their own genres and creative paths. Even if they were not traditional freedom fighters as we think of them, to Club 27, as it's often referred to when an iconic person dies at this age, which, as a side note, if you're not aware of this, this often links into a lot of conspiracy theories as to why this person died at that particular age. Like 27 is said to be something quite key as to why it happened then. If we consider all this, we can add Deolinda to the club, and her death was definitely, I would say, most likely some kind of conspiracy or plot to take her down by the Portuguese colonisers of the time. So the colonial government of the time thought that they could silence her by taking her out, that would be it. But they didn't, because her legacy does live on in the streets that are named after her in her country, in the books that carry her words, and obviously in the hearts of many and every Angolian, and also every Black woman who decides to remember exactly what it is that she gave to the advancement of Black people. So to close out then, after discovering all this stuff about this wonderful lady, I said to myself, what can 21st century women really learn from Deolinda? Deolinda may have lived in a very different time, but her life offers timeless lessons that still speak to us directly as Black women today, especially those with the intention of building joyful, intentional, and freedom-rooted lives. Firstly, clearly we can see that your voice is a weapon, so use it. Deolinda was not just a fighter. She was a writer, a thinker, and clearly a great communicator. She used her pen to challenge colonialism, patriarchy, and injustice. Her diaries were powerful tools of resistance for her. And I guess this is why many women of colour and Black women write on subjects such as oppression. I know I would place myself here, and I see my writing as a tool, even if I gain the odd enemy or two on my viewpoint. So the point here is what we can learn is to use your voice. No matter how you use it, just use it. Secondly, as a Black woman, go where you are needed, even if it's hard. And I say this quite lightly because I know that this can be taken out of context, and it has done historically for us. But hear me out. So Deolinda, she left a comfortable life in America, and I use the word comfortable very, very lightly, as at the time in the 1960s, it was not comfortable for any Black person, especially Black women, with the oppression from men of all races and non-Black women, mainly, I would say, white women. However, compared to what was happening in her native location in Angola, it was probably more tolerable for her. Regardless, she left the USA to return to Angola and join the liberation struggle that was going on here. She chose purpose over personal safety. Now, today, to me, this learning from her actions could translate to us doing exactly that. As Black women, go where you are loved and celebrated, even in your personal life, in your dating life. Also place your energy where it is needed, and this is the key part that I want as many Black and brown women to understand what I mean when I say this. Place your energy where it is needed and or will benefit you and fellow Black and brown women in particular. Black women, we have a history of, fighting and protecting everybody but ourselves. And I think that the last part of the statement, that will benefit you or fellow black and brown women in particular, is key to this. So where you're placing your energy, it would be more beneficial to place it where it's going to help us, in other words. Thirdly, the third thing we can learn from her is that freedom is a daily practice. So Deolinda understood that true freedom isn't just political, it's mental, emotional, spiritual, and collective. She wrote about the chains within, not just the ones that were outside and maybe that we could find in everyday society. In today's context for Black women, this could translate in so many ways. Freedom being a daily practice, from who you date and why, to how you date and why, and seeing yourself as the beauty standard and not anyone or anything else. And I've written a lot about this, especially in my essay, The Beauty Standards Has Shifted to Black Women. And if you are reading the written version of this essay, you will find a direct link to it there where you can read it. If you're listening to this on YouTube, then I will drop the link in the description box if you want to head over and see what that's about. Black women, regardless of where in the diaspora we are from, we have a legacy of trauma. I don't think we can deny this, and this trauma has been inflicted and imposed on us, I would say, by men and other women who don't identify as we do or look like us. We fought hard to fight it off, but we still have a lot of work to do. We need to remember or remind ourselves that when it comes to oppression, we have this from all men. Yes, I said all men, not just white men or non-Black men. And what I mean by this is that it could be argued in some respects, given that Black women are doing so well in terms of their education, employment, social mobility, yada, yada, yada. You know the statistics. You've heard lots of Black women speak about this already. We are doing well in these areas globally. And that's not us saying this. This is data being produced to back up and support that argument. This is not us inflating our own egos. This is other people observing this about us, and that's key. Now, this is happening for us, and it appears that we are doing well in these areas compared to black men globally. Okay, so if we think about that, us doing well globally compared to our own men, our biggest oppressors today are not necessarily white or non-black men as it historically has been. It could be argued there's a big potential that it could be our own men. Black men could be our own biggest oppressors. And I know it's a hard thing to admit and say as a black woman, and there's probably people who will want to crucify me for saying that, and so be it, but it's true. And this does not let white men, or non-black men off the hook. It doesn't mean that they're free from it and that they don't do it. But there's enough data out there to support this argument for nuanced oppression that we face compared to other races of women from our own men. It can look very, very different. I've written about this quite a few times, but it's true. That information is out there, and that is, if you're willing to read it, see it for what it is, and not protect black and brown men and their behaviours towards black and brown women that harm them, or see them as something worth protecting over and above yourself, a woman who is in a world that does not always have women's backs generally, regardless of her race. So that would be my third thing that I took from her as black women that we could learn from Deolinda. So to remember Deolinda, I think this is a very powerful quote of hers to close with. She once said that the Angolan woman is not just a woman, she is a worker, a mother, a soldier, and a revolutionary. So I'll repeat that again for you as I mentioned it earlier, and I would like to say that so are you, in your own way and certainly on your own terms. In terms of Deolinda and her timeline of her life, I thought it would be really cool just to drop this in here so we know what actually happened for her historically. She was born in 1939, as I said, in Angola. She was raised in a politically aware and religious household. She became committed to justice from a very young age. In the 1950s, she goes off and she studies in both her home country and Brazil. She excels in school and begins higher education. She later then travels to Brazil on a church scholarship, where she is exposed to liberation theory and raising black consciousness. In the 1960s is when she moves to the United States. She attends Methodist institutions in the US, including studies at Spelman College and also at Drew University. Here she witnesses racism and segregation firsthand, which deepens her understanding of global anti-blackness and strengthens her revolutionary views that she had. In the early 1960s, she returns back home to join the struggle. She rejects the life of comfort and she goes back here. She helps establish I'm just going to leave it as the abbreviation, which is the OMA, which was an organization to organize women and fight for their actual liberation. In the mid-1960s, she became a fighter. She also worked as a nurse, a political educator, a translator, and a radio operator. It's at this point she starts to write her letters, keep her journals, and documenting her experiences on thoughts about gender, liberation, and spirituality. 1967, life comes to a sad end. She was captured with her fellow comrades by the rivals, the Portuguese colonial authorities. She was tortured and killed, and she was just 27 years old. And it's also believed that her body has never been found. So how sad is that? So in terms of her legacy, her writings have been published in the English title would be called Diary of an Exile Without Return. So that is her actual book of writing, where we can find her thoughts and, theories on women, gender, race, sex, and all that wonderful things that I've mentioned to you earlier on. So that's it for today. So thank you so much for meeting me at this point, if you've been here for this long and listening into this short video essay on this woman who I would like to feature for Notes on Black Women and add to part of the encyclopedia. If you are listening in on YouTube, then why not give this video a like if you enjoyed it or you learned something, and hang out here with me a bit more if you want. You can subscribe to the channel. I am back to uploading my content as often as I can weekly, or if you're someone who prefers to read essays and articles, you can also head over to Notes on Black Women, the website, and follow me there. All the links will be in the description box. So until next time, much love, the Black Woman Essayist.